This is a Fox News Alert. I'm Chanley Painter. You're taking a live look at the Senate floor right now, where the chamber just passed a key procedural vote to begin debate on President Trump's so-called big beautiful bill. But the vote didn't come without lots of drama. Let's talk about it on Capitol Hill with our senior congressional correspondent, Chad Pergram. Chad, great to be with you early this morning, my friend. Tell us the latest from D.C.
Well, Chanley, this was high drama in the United States Senate with Vice President Vance coming to Capitol Hill potentially to break a tie. They didn't have the votes to get across this procedural hurdle. This is just to start debate on the big, beautiful bill. This is not passage of the big, beautiful bill. This is just to start debate. And as you know, I always say it's all about the math. And they were short 3 votes. There were 50 noes on the board. All 47 Democrats had voted no. And there were 3 Republicans for most of the night. This vote was held open for 3.5 hours. This vote started at 7:31 Eastern time tonight. The noes were Rand Paul, Thom Tillis, and Ron Johnson. But there was a lengthy conversation off stage with Vice President Vance in the office of the Senate Majority Leader John Thune, and eventually Ron Johnson flipped his vote. There were other senators who had not cast their ballots so far. Cynthia Lummis, a Republican of Wyoming, Mike Lee of Utah, and Rick Scott. But they eventually got them to yes, and Ron Johnson, who has been adamant against this bill, saying there's too much spending, said, okay, I'm at least, got some sort of promise here. I just asked a senator a few minutes ago, I said, what was the promise to Ron Johnson from Wisconsin? And they indicated to me that they are not at liberty to say. So what happens next? We've got a long, long, long road ahead of us. Here's what's going on right now. Usually when they actually get on to an actual bill, what happens is they read just the title of the bill. Technically, from a very technical standpoint, they are supposed to read the entire thing out loud. Well, guess what? That almost never happens. They go through that, and then they simply ask unanimous consent. In other words, if all senators are willing, they go on to the next thing, and they go on to actual debate on the bill. Well, Chuck Schumer objected to getting rid of the oral reading of the bill. Back in the old days when they had, parchment paper and quills, there was only one copy of the bill. And so back in the, 18th century, 19th century, early 20, that's when they had to actually just have that one copy. And if you weren't in the chamber to actually hear the bill read, you didn't know necessarily what was in it. So they used to read these out loud. Now we have these 100-page bills, sometimes more than 1,000-page bills. And so this is really just a dilatory tactic by Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader. This has been done before. Back in 2021, March 5th, 2021, Ron Johnson, the aforementioned senator from Wisconsin, he objected to the Democrats dispensing with the reading of a COVID-19 bill, $1.9 trillion, and he stretched out the process for 10 hours and 53 minutes. So this bill is bigger. We think that this will go on all night long, well into the morning tomorrow. We just don't know how long it takes to read this bill. And I should note that there are not limits or regulations, and this is actually, you'll find this in some of the standing orders of the Senate, on how loud the clerk must read. They've actually addressed this issue, and how fast or slow the clerk must read. And so there's several different reading clerks. If you look at the screen, there's a gentleman just kind of to the right of the dais there. He's reading this out loud, and he will read this in a sonorous tone all night long, and then they will switch to somebody else after, say, 45 minutes or an hour, and they'll get them some throat lozenges or Cepastat or whatever it is to keep them going. Now, tomorrow, here's what's going to happen. Whenever they wrap this up, they then go to up to 20 hours of debate. We don't think they're going to take that. It's going to be probably more like 10 to 12 hours. And then, Chanley, we go to something called a vote-a-rama. This is where they vote, and they vote, and they vote round the clock. This is why this process is so elongated here. Usually what happens in a vote-a-rama, the shortest one we've had in recent years, in fact, it was earlier this year, was just under 10 hours. The longest one we've had in recent years was just under 15 hours. So then they should be able to get, if you time all this out sometime Monday morning, maybe Monday midday, get to a final vote on the big, beautiful bill. Aha, but we are not even out of the woods yet. Then they have to sync this bill up, presuming it passes, with the House of Representatives. And there are a lot of conservatives in the House of Representatives who don't like this bill in this form coming out of the Senate right now. Again, they have that narrow majority in the House. I've talked about how this is about the math. We'll see if they can accept later this week. And remember, the deadline set by President Trump is the 4th of July to adopt the Senate version of the big, beautiful bill, Chanley.
So fascinating, Chad, and it sounds so complicated as you explain it to us. But as you said, this is just a procedural vote, right? So when this does actually make it through the debate process, we still could not have enough votes possibly to pass this and make this big, beautiful bill law, right?
Absolutely. It's not unprecedented to have somebody in the Senate vote on procedure to say, yes, I'm not going to stop the process now. I'm going to let it go forward. This is where we thought for a long time we might have a tie vote if they could pluck off those others and get them to 50-50, and then Vice President Vance could break the tie in his capacity as the president of the Senate. Didn't come to that, but he was certainly in the building since about 8 o'clock tonight. But, during that vote-a-rama, that's where you have amendments. And so the bill is organic. It's changing. It's evolving. And maybe somebody says, they put that thing in the bill. I like it. I can vote for it now. Maybe something is taken out or something else is put in that they don't like, and they say, I'm a no now. So that could interfere with the process. But this test vote tonight was key. And it's a signal to the House Republicans, that the Senate is forging ahead. We thought that this is what was going to happen. It just took longer than we expected, although maybe that should not be expected because on Capitol Hill, the timing is never exactly Swiss.
Exactly. Have we heard anything yet from President Trump tonight? I know he's been active on social media, but since we had this procedural vote go through.
Yes, we've heard from him a couple of times. He has absolutely torched Tom Tillis, the Republican senator from North Carolina. He has alluded to the fact on Truth Social, calling him a grandstander, saying he's not representing his constituents in North Carolina very well. Tom Tillis will be up for re-election in 2026. And in a much shorter, much more brief Truth Social post, he indicated that he'd like to see a primary challenger against Tom Tillis. This is kind of the Thomas Massie treatment, the Republican congressman from Kentucky who President Trump has not seen eye to eye with and who voted against the House version of the big, beautiful bill back on May 22nd and also called for a primary challenge against him. Certainly a lot coming from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue toward the senator from North Carolina tonight.
Absolutely. Now, the president has indicated he wants this bill signed by July 4th. Is that even possible at this point, Chad?
Yes, I wouldn't rule it out, although the president, he kind of sent a couple of signals the other day during the public speech. This was Friday afternoon. He indicated, he said, we could let that slip a little bit, there. But on another statement that he put out later in the day, he said, I want this done. It's imperative that the House of Representatives syncs up and passes this by then. There's nothing magic about the 4th of July, except in Congress, nothing gets done unless there's a deadline. And also, they need to move quickly because, somebody put it earlier today that a lot of these bills, they're not like wine. They don't get better with time. They're more like yogurt and house guests and fish and things like that. So you need about 3 days to kind of process these. But they don't want that to sit out there that long, and that's where some think maybe they pass this in the House. Again, if they have the votes, I'll underscore that, maybe right before the 4th of July. President Trump would certainly like the optics of that, maybe having the big celebration for the 4th of July on the National Mall, right in front of the Capitol, the National Symphony performing, and they've just passed the so-called big, beautiful bill.
Now, Chad, a couple of things. We have a couple of minutes left here, but remind us what is in this bill, and was it surprising that it did take several hours to pass this procedural hurdle this evening?
Yeah, I think it's because they just didn't have the votes yet, and I was told that there were some numbers that individual senators were waiting to come in. Ron Johnson, if you look back very closely at his public statements the past couple of days, he has been crystal clear. He says, I'm not going to vote to proceed until I get some numbers. And we were told kind of on the down low here that there were going to be some other numbers from the Congressional Budget Office that speak to the what they call the current policy baseline. This is one way to evaluate the cost of the bill. And there's a lot of different ways you can crunch the numbers, but that baseline is kind of what Senate Republicans are using. And we were told we were going to get those numbers probably around 11 o'clock. And maybe Senator Johnson got those numbers. Again, like I said, we've been trying to figure that out here. He hasn't said anything just yet. But they might have gotten some numbers that they really liked or gotten some promises that they would guarantee. Or maybe, and again, as I say before, it's not unprecedented to have somebody say, I might be no later, but I'm going to be yes now because I'm not going to stand in the way of the process.
Chad Pergram, any final thoughts as we're about to go to break?
It is going to be a long several days on Capitol Hill. All-night session tonight.
And you will be working all of it.
You got it.
You will be there for us. Thank you so much, Chad Pergram. Again, if you are just now joining us, you're taking a live look at the Senate floor where the chamber just passed a key procedural vote to begin debate on President Trump's so-called big, beautiful bill. But the vote, it didn't come without lots of drama, with 2 Republicans actually voting no this evening. So there's still a long way to go through before a final vote on this bill. Now, the minority leader, Chuck Schumer, he has already forced a full reading, as Chad said, of this bill on the Senate floor. That's going to take a long time, like 10 to 12 hours. And then after the reading of this hundreds of pages, it'll be a vote-a-rama. That will begin, and it's going to be an open-ended, hours-long series of votes on amendments. As Chad said, this will be changing and evolving over time. That's 900 pages of this mega bill already filled with Republican priorities ranging from tax breaks to spending cuts to increased deportation funding, all of President Trump's agenda, his domestic agenda. And he wants this signed, as we said, into law, hopefully by July 4th. That is his goal. And as Chad said, that is possible, but failure to pass it could jeopardize his agenda moving forward. That is the latest here in New York and on the floor in D.C.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.